Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this, because today we are tackling the final and, honestly, arguably the most critical topic when it comes to distributed networks, securing the edge. Now, up until now, we've looked at the incredible potential of edge and fog computing. But today, we really need to confront the elephant in the room. I mean, how do you actually secure a network when its most vital components are literally sitting out in the open?
Think about it like this: a traditional cloud data center. It's basically a massive steel-reinforced bank vault. It's heavily guarded, it's meticulously monitored, the whole shebang is entirely locked down. But an edge node, well, that is essentially like taking a small, plastic combination safe and just leaving it sitting on a park bench, kind of just hoping for the best. When we take the brain of our operations out of that highly secure, centralized cloud and place it, say, onto a street lamp or maybe a factory floor, we completely break traditional security models. It introduces this massive physical vulnerability problem simply because a malicious actor could theoretically just walk right up to it. No walled garden, no security guard.
So, to figure out how we actually fix this, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the perimeter problem. Second, authentication and trust. Third, data privacy and GDPR. And we'll wrap it all up with a definitive comparison matrix.
All right, let's jump straight into our first pillar. Section 1. The perimeter problem, the end of the walled garden.
So traditional centralized cloud computing relies entirely on having this giant digital perimeter wall. You build firewalls, you set up intrusion detection systems, and once the data actually gets inside that walled garden, it's generally trusted. But edge computing, it completely destroys that perimeter because the devices are scattered absolutely everywhere, and because there is no longer a perimeter wall, we face entirely new, highly localized attack vectors. First up is physical tampering. This is where an attacker literally just unscrews a smart traffic camera, pulls out the memory chip, and walks away with the cryptographic keys. Wild, right? Second is rogue node injection. This happens when an attacker connects a fake fog gateway to the network, which actively tricks your edge sensors into sending their sensitive data straight to the attacker instead of your real server. Seeing this, it makes it immediately clear why the old cloud defense methods just completely fail out here in the wild.
So, the crucial point here is, because we simply cannot physically guard every single sensor on the planet, it's just impossible, we have to change our entire security philosophy. We must adopt a strict zero-trust architecture. As this framework highlights, zero trust assumes the physical hardware is already compromised from the get-go. Literally nothing is trusted by default, not because of where it is, not because of what it is. Absolutely everything requires continuous verification.
And that constant need for continuous verification brings us right to Section 2, authentication and trust, proving identity at the edge.
Now you might be wondering, if we assume a device might be compromised, how does a fog node actually verify that an edge sensor is legitimate, especially without relying on traditional, super-heavy cloud encryption protocols? Well, on the cloud side, authentication uses heavy public key infrastructure with these massive RSA encryption keys. But remember the hardware constraints of the edge? A tiny little edge microcontroller with, say, maybe 512 kilobytes of RAM? It will literally crash if you ask it to compute a 2048-bit RSA encryption. It just can't handle it. So, edge authentication has to rely on lightweight cryptography, things like elliptic curve cryptography, or ECC, and mutual authentication. This basically means both the device and the gateway must actively prove their identities to each other before a single byte of data is ever transferred.
But here is the catch with basic authentication. It's binary, right? You're either verified or you aren't. But what happens when a verified, perfectly authenticated node gets hacked later on and starts sending fake data? Well, that is exactly why we also need trust management. Instead of just checking a password once at the door and letting them in, the network continuously and dynamically evaluates a node's behavior over time. If a node starts acting maliciously, it's going to get caught.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the math behind it. It's actually fascinating. The network assigns a dynamic trust score to every single node. The formula calculates the final score, which we call T-total, by combining a node's direct trust, which is based on your past interactions with it, alongside indirect trust, which essentially acts as community recommendations. And that alpha symbol you see? That simply acts as a weighting factor to balance how much you trust your own personal experience versus the community's overall opinion. So, if a node suddenly starts dropping packets or sending out anomalous readings, its T-total drops below a safe threshold, and the fog orchestrator instantly quarantines it. Boom, threat neutralized.
Okay, let's move on and see how this builds. because securing the device is one thing, but securing the data it collects is entirely another. Welcome to Section 3, Data Privacy and GDPR, Surviving Strict Regulations.
You know, the traditional cloud model is actually fundamentally at odds with laws like the GDPR, primarily because of the data minimization principle. This is a critical mandate stating that organizations should only collect and move the absolute minimum amount of personal data necessary for their service. To put that into perspective, imagine a smart hospital streaming raw, unencrypted video of patients over a wide area network to some centralized cloud server in a completely different country just to analyze their walking posture. I mean, no way, right? That is a massive, direct violation of this privacy principle and an absolutely enormous legal liability.
In this brilliantly illustrates how edge computing actually solves the GDPR crisis. By keeping the processing local, we filter the data right at the edge boundary. We do this using 3 sequential techniques. First up, data anonymization. The edge server simply strips out faces, names, and IP addresses right at the source, before anything even leaves the room. Second is homomorphic encryption. This is a real game changer. It allows the Fog node to perform mathematical operations on encrypted data without ever needing to decrypt it first. And third, federated learning. This trains AI models locally on the edge device itself, so only the mathematical learnings, the gradients, are sent back to the cloud, never the raw user data. It is just such an elegant technical solution to a major legal headache.
We've covered a lot of crucial ground today, so let's pull it all together as we enter our final section. Section 4. The comparison matrix, cloud versus edge.
Take a moment to really look at this matrix to cement your understanding of these fundamental architectural trade-offs. Notice how physical security goes from extremely high in the cloud to completely exposed and low on the edge. The network perimeter shifts from well-defined enterprise firewalls to being completely blurred, which, as we discussed, forces us to use zero trust. Authentication moves from being centralized and heavy to decentralized and super lightweight. And data privacy? It completely flips from a high risk when centralizing raw data over a network to a low risk thanks to local processing and anonymization. Finally, our primary threat vectors fundamentally change from things like DDoS attacks and phishing in the cloud to physical tampering and rogue nodes right at the edge.
All of this paints a picture of a radically different, highly dynamic security landscape. You simply cannot secure the edge the exact same way you secure the cloud. But, recognizing these vulnerabilities leaves us with one massive, really provocative thought. If the edge is physically exposed, constantly under attack, and relying on incredibly lightweight hardware, how do we defend it autonomously in real time? Like, how can we leverage machine learning models directly on these tiny edge nodes to detect these anomalies the very second they happen? That is a fascinating frontier for sure, and it's exactly the kind of question you should be asking next as you continue to explore the future of distributed networks. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.